The 5 questions you need to know about selfishness is about to begin. You're watching Timeless Talks, timeless subjects, information for life. Now, are there any questions about selfishness?
What does the word selfishness actually mean?
That's a good question to ask, and I'm glad that you've asked it. We need to know what the meaning of selfishness is. Well, Webster has got his idea, and it's pretty good. He talks about being excessively concerned with their own selves or exclusively concerned about their own selves, and they have very little regard, if no regard, for other people. Now, that's what Merriam-Webster says. Now, the Bible has got its own set of words that it uses. Some of them are words like self-seeking or selfish ambition, especially selfish ambition. It tends to be a word that reflects the idea of having a contentious way about themselves, a partisanship where they divide and create factions and divisions so that their agendas can be met. And it creates this rivalry and party making. Democrats and Republicans, and both of them tend to have selfish people inside them. And there's other words in the Bible like conceit, self-conceit, and lovers of themselves, which means exactly what you'd think it means. They're all about themselves exclusively and have no interest in other people. And the Bible talks about words like insisting on their own way, which we'll visit in a little bit. Yes, ma'am.
What attributes of selfishness would a psychologist list?
How do psychologists deal with selfishness? Well, I thought that might be something you would ask. And I prepared by looking at numerous websites about psychology. Most psychologists say that selfish people think and believe that they deserve everything that comes. It's owed to them. There are also people who believe that they will always be successful. They never even consider that they could have some misfortune or reversal of roles to where they might not be successful. You see, selfish people, according to the psychologist, rarely, if ever, expose themselves to the possibility of losing. And besides that, psychologists say selfish people don't care who is in their way. It doesn't matter about the success or the failure of anybody else as long as they get what they think is owed to them. Psychologists also say that they don't listen to anybody who disagrees with them. You ever heard any politicians doing that? Not listening? And then there are also people, according to psychology, there are people who believe that to live in poverty means that those people don't work hard. Or maybe they prefer living in the street. Or they're not strong-willed like I am. Or they're not persistent enough to get educated.
Excuse me, but what?
Well, okay, I'll repeat that again. Yeah. The psychologists feel that people who live in poverty are more like they deserve it because they don't work. They don't want to work. They want to be lazy. They prefer living in the street. And they're not strong-willed people like they themselves are. And they're not persistent enough to carry it through to highly educate themselves. There are also people who are not humble, psychologists say. As a matter of fact, instead of being low, they tend to exaggerate their own achievements. You see, they are the ones who will take as much of the responsibility for the success of a project or an election or a campaign or whatever so that they look good. But if that project or effort appears to be failing, they're going to be the first one out the door and leave it dangling and hanging and let someone else clean up the mess because they can't be failures. Are there other questions? Yes.
What can happen inside organizations like churches or groups when selfish members are present?
You know, you could find that out for yourself if you just Googled that. Most of what you're going to find then is what people think. And not to say that people can't be right occasionally, but I would like to find out something solid that will be consistent every time and have the answer every time. And the only place I know that has those kinds of answers to this difficult question is the Bible itself. So let's go there and see if there's answers for this. And there are. The Bible has got answers to almost every one of life's questions. One of these is James 3, verse 16, which says, where jealousy and selfish ambition exist. Now that's that word we talked about earlier, how that they create parties and things. For where there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there will be, here's the two things that happen in society, disorder and every vile practice. Secondly, there will be lots of vile, unspeakable, unmentionable, disgusting things going on. The Bible also tells us that sound judgment seems to go out the window. Proverbs 18:1 says, whoever isolates himself seeks his own desires. Isn't that the part of a selfish person? He breaks out against all sound judgment. In Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, is that passage that talks about us loving your neighbor as yourself. When people are selfish inside of an organization, there is no love for anyone else, much less any concern for them, no unity, no working together. It's all about me. Love has no place. We got to take care of my needs and my judgments and my way of thinking. You see, God's ways gets pushed aside to the point that even following Jesus' own principles are, well, it's like they just kind of fade away like a mist in the glory of the selfish one. Yeah, I'm being facetious. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me, he says in Luke 9:23. Yes, ma'am.
When selfishness is present, what other bad things can happen in society, in America, or beyond that?
It is something to think about, is that when selfishness is present, what could happen in our society, not just in the organizations, but in the society in general. It just adds to the problem, and more of the same kind of things are found. For example, truth. Truth is simply not obeyed. It's not valued. When you remove truth, what's going to come in? Lies, falsehoods. James 2 verse 8 says, but for those who are self-seeking, there's that word we talked about earlier, divide to conquer. Well, that's what's going on here. But for those who are self-seeking and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, there is wrath and fury. So the truth and the value of truth is put aside, and wrong things, unrighteousness, seems to flourish even more in our society. Hostility also steps to the front. You see, it tells us in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 at verse 20 that hostility will be present. That's a sad thing. And haven't we seen enough of that in recent months? All kinds of violent protests for numerous ideas. Hostility becomes present. As well as factions and parties and divisions become more and more that way. Galatians 5 verse 20 lists strife as one of the things that's going to happen. That kind of strife that promotes divisions and factions and splits us up. Loving others is replaced with loving self only. 2 Timothy 3 tells us, but understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty, for people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive. On down there's ungrateful. And there's a whole list of ugly things that happen. But lovers of self was the very first thing. It's not just about loving myself. And to some degree that is okay because we need to take care of our bodies according to God. But at the same time, it's spoken of here as an exclusive thing, where I'm the only person that I love, so that loving others goes away. It's an insistence on my way. The expression my way or the highway, well, where do you think that comes from? But that's what is present when love is not present. When we've already concluded that love is going to be going out the window, well, the only thing that's left then is an insistence on my own way. In that great love chapter, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, it tells us that love does not insist on its own way. But you see, that's what's going on with a selfish person. They are insisting on their own way. Another thing that's going to happen in our society is pleasing me as the only thing I care about. Pleasing myself only is what is spoken of in the Bible. The Bible says in Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, that we who are strong have an obligation to bear the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. And sadly, everything that seems to be about Christianity and God is being pushed aside to meet the needs of selfish individuals. For they all seek their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. The people who are focused on themselves have no consideration between rights and wrongs. Yes.
Since God's ways always work, what does he tell us to do to remove or prevent selfishness?
That's a certainly question worth asking. I'm very glad that you did, because this discussion that we've been having has been rather dark and dismal and sad, gloomy, and the hope is just not there. We both know that that's not God's way. God's way has got a way of turning things around and looking things right. And maybe we need to just go back and do what God says. I want to give you 5 ways that you can do that will certainly improve your life and the society that's right around you. Number 1 is listen to what God is saying. When David was appealing to God, he said, "Incline my heart to your testimonies and not to selfish gain." David knew that if he listened to God, did you hear that? Listened. You got 2 of these things, 1 of these things. Maybe you need to do this twice as much as you do this. Second thing that you need to do, based upon the first, is that as you read, you're going to learn that God wants us to be humble. That's number 2. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. And then there's Romans 12:3. For by the grace given to me, I speak to everyone among you to not think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. I need to lower myself down lower. I need to be more of a servant than the front runner, demanding everybody pay attention to me. And then when I do that, it leads me to the third great thing I can do, and that's putting more emphasis on other people than I do myself. They are more important. Now, look. I realize that that is so contradictory to our society that we live in that maybe we need to take off our own glasses, well, the way we think and what we see, and take the glasses from God and put them on so I can see other people's real value, the value that God puts on other people and wants me to think like He does. For example, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility. That's that very thing we just talked about. But in humility, count others more significant than yourself. And then there's Romans 15, 1 and 2. We who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. Let each of us please his neighbor for his good, to build him up. And then it says, let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. Everybody else needs to be more important than what I am. I need to be your servant. I am trying to serve you through these videos. I want you to grow and have a better life, and this is what you can have. But see, I've got to be doing these things, listening to God, being humble, and valuing other people higher than myself. That will also then, when I follow these three, will lead me to number 4, and that's to love others. That great love chapter, we referred to it earlier. Love does not insist on its own way. Where love is, selfishness is gone. Selfishness has been replaced. And then there's that passage we also looked at earlier about how that you should love your neighbor as yourself. Well, look, when I love my neighbor, I'm preventing selfishness in myself and hopefully helping them to not be selfish either. Then unity can come. Then the good things can begin to flow from God's ways and God's principles. That leads to number 5. None of these are easy, but they're simple to think about. I'm going to start taking the things that God's telling me in this good book, and I'm going to start implementing them into my life because He thinks that they're very important. I'm not so interested in my own interest, but those of Jesus Christ, as it says in Philippians 2:21. And then that passage we looked at earlier, Luke 9, verse 23, we deny ourselves and take up our cross daily, and we follow Him. That is putting His ways ahead of my own ways. I can't make you do this, and you can't make someone else you know do this either, but we can only invite them and show them that this is a better way when we can have unity and peace and harmony. That's what we want right now, isn't it? We want that peace, we want the unity, and it's possible, but only when we deny ourselves and ask other people to do the same thing too. I'm glad that you joined us. Thank you so much for watching. Help our ministry as we've talked about. And until next time, goodbye for now. Timeless Talks with Tim needs your help today. See the button? Click it. See the bell? Click it. Then select all. That's how you can help. Thank you.